forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
And greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Dace, and I am alongside my co-host and, of course, never partner, which you need to clarify in these days, the one and only Aaron McIntyre. Good to see you, brother. How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Well, it is August, which means within this calendar month, we're going to have college football games that count, beginning with the Big Ten. We will kick it off here. What is it? 24 or 5 days here between.
Today's the 3rd, so yeah, it's about 24 days.
Yeah, between Northwestern and Nebraska. In Dublin, Ireland, that's the first Fox Big Noon Sunday game of the year for week 0. And it's the first game of the year in college football, period. So I'm doing pretty good, man. I mean, the most wonderful time of the year is pretty much here. Camps open around the Big Ten. Next week, I would presume we'll start seeing some of those Big Ten camp reports from BTN. They take the bus around the league. So things are looking up. We just had Big Ten football media days. And normally we would kind of break down what was said by coaches and players. I got to tell you, I thought it was pretty meh this year because the big picture news that was made by the commissioner, Kevin Warren, in what he had to say, I just think that overshadowed the entire event. So if you don't mind, I think we'd be better off probably talking about those things than, who might be the starting middle linebacker for Purdue this fall. Fair?
Agreed.
So after watching Kevin Warren give his address, answer questions, and then listening to a couple of other interviews he gave, I went on our Bigger Ten Twitter account and made the following predictions of where I think Big Ten football, college football in general is going in the future based off of what Kevin Warren said. Number one, and I'll just do these one by one and let you respond, okay? I think the Big Ten is going to expand more this decade with or without Notre Dame, although it obviously prefers the Irish's inclusion, but I think it will expand either way.
I think this is mostly true. I also have, I think Dennis Dodd was tweeting about this. I'm not sure the actual source of this, but there was some rumblings out there out there that maybe even, and I think I said this on Bigger Ten, though I really cast doubt on it. Cal actually might be one of the expansion teams. I'm not sure about that. I think maybe they're putting this out there right now to say to the Irish, hey, if we get to 24 teams and you're not a part of it, you missed the boat, buddy.
Yeah, get off the pot, basically.
So I think this might be a little bit of a gambit to try to speed up their decision-making process a little bit. I do agree mostly, though, that they will have to expand, and I'm torn. So demographically, I'd prefer they expand into ACC territory. Regionality, though, like what I laid out a few weeks ago in terms of what the Big Ten needs to do in expanding west, I really like the idea of getting Oregon, Washington, Stanford involved. But overall, yes, I think this is true.
All right, number two. The era of the Power 2, no longer the Power 5, the Power 2 conferences is upon us, although there will be technically more conferences than that. There will be more than that, like there's actually 10 conferences now, but only 5 really make decisions for everybody else. There will be more conferences than 2 moving forward, but it'll basically be those 2 making decisions for everybody else because one is a front for ESPN and the other is the front for Fox.
Yep. Whether or not any of us like it, I don't necessarily, but let's take a step back though. Honestly, when was the last time this wasn't true?
For all intents and purposes, yes. I mean, people want to go back to the Alliance last year, which now really looks like the Et tu, Brute.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, the reason that was done is the Big Ten needed other partners to make sure that the college football playoff did not expand until its television partners could have a bid. If they had expanded it last year, it was still in the exclusive window for ESPN. Now, here's the thing, though, to your point, Aaron. After this contract is up, they won't need unanimous consent to move any longer.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's true.
And they did this time. And so that's why the Big Ten needed more partners. But in the future, when they won't need that, you're right. It will officially then just be those two will be making decisions for everybody. Number 3, the Big Ten will expand West and South this decade.
Yeah, I think that's a fair prediction. I think the Big Ten would prefer first to move south now that you've already got the big 2 teams out west locked up. But I don't know how difficult politically it will be necessarily to just completely leave those 2 out on an island. I think there's going to be some pressure to bring in at least 2 other West Coast teams. I can see a Georgia Tech or definitely a North Carolina wanting to join the Big Ten and fitting in pretty well. So I can see that happening.
All right. Number 4, the Rose Bowl will eventually replace Indianapolis as the permanent home of the Big Ten championship game. Remember that Fox is based in LA.
I love this, and I think that should happen. And I think they'd be stupid not to make that the permanent home of the Big Ten championship game. If we do have Big Ten semifinal games, I think a revolving host of locations for those semifinal games would be a good thing. But I still maintain, I think the Rose Bowl game, not going to be played on January 1st anymore. I think the Rose Bowl game should be synonymous with the Big Ten championship game to give it as much gravitas as it actually deserves.
Number 5, the Pac whatever, because who knows how many teams it will have, the Pac whatever conference will cease to exist this decade.
I do not think that that's accurate. I think it'll cease to exist within the next 5 years.
Okay. So you're even more pessimistic than me. Okay. Number 6, the Big Ten will be the first conference to offer players revenue sharing via TV revenue.
Man alive, I really don't have that much disagreement with most of these. I know this is really, really fun listening to hear us bickering back and forth and just saying, yep. But just like the Big Ten was a trailblazer in actually having a TV network, I can totally see this as being the next logical step, albeit, 15, 20 years later.
And this is something that Harbaugh was talking about at Big Ten Media Days. Remember a few years ago, he was talking about a one-time transfer anywhere you want with no penalty, right? He was talking about name, image, and likeness a few years ago. I don't think he just throws these things out there. Jimmy for his quirky persona, this is also very calculating. And I think he tends to promote stuff that he thinks the Overton window is just about to permit, right? And you try to get ahead of them. So you seem like you're very progressive and pro player in this day and age from a recruiting standpoint. And so the fact that he is openly talking about it, to me, indicates that it's at least somewhere behind closed doors being discussed. Number 7, Las Vegas will eventually host the Big Ten basketball tournament.
This one makes sense, but I disagree. It's not Big Ten country. It would be perfect. A lot of people would go to that. I mean, just from all over the country. That's an easy ticket to get, plane ticket to get. It's fairly inexpensive, at least traditionally anyway. That would make a lot of sense, but like I said, it's not Big Ten country. I think it might be a little bit too far outside of the box for the Big Ten, so I don't really see that happening.
Number 8, the Big Ten will eventually go to 10 conference football games.
Yeah, this is what I said in my ideal conference breakdown, and I think you have to now. It's all of the Band-Aids are off now. All of the masks are off. This is just a completely TV-driven business.
Yep.
And so if it's a TV-driven business, why would NBC or CBS or Fox or even ESPN, if they still stay on for a few games, why would they ever want to televise Maryland versus Richmond? I don't explain that to me. I don't think they do. And then you're telling me that's 3 games a year of those types of things. So yeah, that's going to happen.
Number 9, Kevin Warren and SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey already have some private agreement on playoff expansion and how it will go. They're the only 2 opinions that matter now. And the Big Ten, of course, was floating a 16-team playoff, which Harbaugh was also talking about a few years ago, with no automatic bids. later in the program, we're going to take a look at how that would have altered the college football playoff if we had that format from the beginning. But what are your thoughts that Warren and Sankey, they're the only two opinions that matter. They have some, I think, informal outline on what the new expansion will look like.
If the 16-team playoff with no auto bids is already an idea that's percolating in Big Ten land, then I think the answer to this question is yes.
There's no way the SEC would oppose that.
Yeah, there's absolutely no way. In fact, it sounds like their idea.
Yeah, I mean, they could probably think they're going to get 6 or 7 teams a year in that.
Correct.
Yeah.
So if that's already percolating in Big Ten land, I think that there's already some sort of gentleman's handshake on expanding the playoff.
And then finally, number 10 here, the new TV deal will include the following platforms. Fox will remain the Tier 1 main rights holder, obviously. ESPN will actually be given a limited package for football, but that will actually be maintained because the Big Ten wants access to them for hoops, and so does ESPN. So they will get some bone thrown at them to keep some football in order to maintain their very lucrative basketball relationship. And then CBS or NBC will get a weekly game as well. And then Friday nights will go exclusive to Amazon or Apple, and then the Big Ten Network gets the rest.
Depending on what happens with Notre Dame, you could say CBS and NBC get a weekly game, which would be
something.
Be awesome. I mean, you'd imagine your conference is on literally every single network, every major TV network in the United States every weekend. That would be something to behold. But the Friday night package. I guess just to get their foot in the door, an Amazon or an Apple TV would probably fork over the money that the Big Ten would expect. Because Friday nights, it's college football. It's going to get ratings. It's going to get some viewers. But for the next gen of streaming, which is not just the linear stream of YouTube TV, Sling, things like that. When we're talking about Amazon TV and Apple TV, I'm not sure how many viewers are going to be able to glom onto that, but I can see both of them kind of saying, if this is what we need to do, if we need to fork out something that's a little overvalued right now for a Friday night slot just to get our foot in the door for a future play at a much bigger role in streaming, I can see them doing that.
So with all that laid out, let's have a conversation about what it would actually have looked like going back to 2014 if we had what the Big Ten is now openly discussing, a 16-team playoff with no automatic bids. And we will do that here in just a moment. All right, back here on Bigger Ten, Steve Deace alongside Aaron McIntyre. So the Big Ten, which of course last year was adamant, there must be automatic bids. That was just cover. The Big Ten didn't want to come right out and say, we're stalling the playoff because we're sick of ESPN having total control of the sport. And we want our honeypot over there, Fox, to have a say in the matter as well. They couldn't say that, right? At least they don't think they could. I don't know why they couldn't have, but I think their consultants probably told them you can't say that. So instead come up with some sort of, high-minded, idealistic reason. Automatic bids, as if the Big Ten champion would never not actually get into a 12-team college football playoff, right? Okay. But that notwithstanding, okay, the Big Ten is now openly discussing a 16-team playoff without auto bids, as we were just talking about. So I went through and looked at the final college football playoff ratings going back to the advent of the CFB playoff in 2014, Aaron, and came up with how these would have been the fields these years instead of what we got. All right. So you're looking at number 1 seed Alabama, get used to that, against Missouri, Michigan State, Kansas State in the 8-9 game, Baylor, and there's Georgia Tech. That's kind of the end of Paul Johnson's run there with the triple option there in Atlanta, Ohio State and Georgia, TCU, Kansas State. Whoops, I think I got them twice. My bad. Florida State, UCLA, Mississippi State. That's Dak Prescott against Arizona. And Rich Rod, Oregon and Arizona State. That would have been the field in 2014. In 2015, Clemson versus Oklahoma State. Clemson, the number 1 seed. Notre Dame, Florida State as an 8-9. That just sounds cool. Iowa and Ole Miss in the 5-12. Oklahoma, Northwestern getting in the 4-13. Stanford and TCU 6-11. How about this in Jim Harbaugh's first year? A Michigan State-Michigan rematch. Here's what's funny about that. if Michigan doesn't blow the punt snap, these two teams probably
have.
also play each
Yeah.
other, but if the seeds are probably reversed.
Yeah.
Michigan's the 3 seed and Michigan State's the 14. That's kind of weird. Ohio State, North Carolina, and Alabama, the number 2 seed, against the Oregon Ducks would have been the field in 2015. In 2016, Alabama, number 1 seed again against West Virginia, Wisconsin and USC in the 8-9 game, Penn State, Oklahoma State, Washington, and there's Louisville out of the ACC, Michigan and Florida State. They ended up playing in the Orange Bowl that very year, actually. Ohio State and Auburn, Oklahoma versus Colorado in an old Big 8, Big 12 rematch. And then you would have had Clemson against Western Michigan. So that's our first Group of 5 team. That's PJ Fleck's undefeated Western Michigan Broncos that year. In 2017, Clemson, the number 1 seed again, against Michigan State, USC, and Penn State in the 8-9 game. That sounds pretty cool. Ohio State versus Central Florida, Alabama and Stanford in the 4-13, Wisconsin and Washington, Georgia and Notre Dame. These just sound like great matchups, man. Auburn and Miami, and then Oklahoma and TCU in a Big 12 rematch. 2018, Alabama, West Virginia again in the 116 matchup. Central Florida versus Washington. Georgia versus Penn State in the 5-12. Oklahoma versus Washington State in the 4-13. You're also seeing a good diversity of teams here, by the way. Ohio State, LSU in the 6-11. Notre Dame, Kentucky. There's Kentucky getting in 2018. Michigan and Florida, who played in the Peach Bowl after that season. Clemson against Texas in the 2-15. I mean, these matchups sound pretty sweet to me, man. 2019, good luck with your Hawks against that record-breaking LSU offense. Good luck there. Congratulations, you made the playoff, and here's your prize. Yeah. Wisconsin and Florida in the 8-9, Georgia and Auburn, the South's oldest rivalry. Can you imagine how the hype would have been if this was a playoff game? Oklahoma versus Alabama, Oregon versus Utah. Clemson, that's the first time we see the Utes. Clemson versus Michigan. That sounds pretty cool.
Yep.
Those schools have never played.
And just want to throw in a bookmark right here. Remember 2019 season for my reaction after this.
You got it.
Remember 2019.
You bet. Baylor, Penn State. So a lot of Big Ten representation here again. Ohio State and Notre Dame. That's your first round playoff game. That sounds pretty legit. 2020, Alabama, the number 1 seed again against BYU. Cincinnati and Georgia in the 8-9. They actually played in the bowl game that season. Texas A&M versus Coastal Carolina. So there's another Group of 5 team. BYU, they're an independent. Would we call them a Group of 5, I guess? Notre Dame versus North Carolina. Oklahoma, there's the Indiana Hoosiers. In the 2020 season. Yeah. Indiana and Northwestern both make the college football playoff. Iowa and Iowa State both make the college football playoff. That is nuts, man. That's nuts, but here we are. And then last season, Alabama, the number 1 seed, once more against Oklahoma. Ole Miss and Oklahoma State in the 8-9 game. Notre Dame and Pittsburgh, there's an old rivalry there from the independent days in the 5-12. Cincinnati against BYU. Ohio State and Utah, who played in the Rose Bowl. Georgia versus Oregon. Baylor versus Michigan State. And Michigan and Iowa would have played in the Big Ten championship game and then turned right around in a month and played each other again.
Likely in Ann Arbor.
In the college football playoff. So here's how this all breaks down, Aaron, by current conference affiliation as scheduled in 2026 when playoff expansion is set to happen. All right, so not right now, but when we do expand in 2026, this would be the conference breakdown. And you can see it is the SEC in the Big Ten's world, and the rest of everybody else is living in it. 35 teams from the SEC, 34 from the Big Ten. And then quite the drop-off. 20 from the Big 12. So thank you to Cincinnati and BYU for getting a couple of bids there to replace Oklahoma and Texas. 16 from the ACC. 15 from the Pac, whatever it will be. Notre Dame made it 6 times. Twice we had Group of 5 teams in the playoffs. So your thoughts after laying it out there, practically, what would be the result if we had lived through this since 2014 of the Big Ten's proposal of a 16-team, no auto bid college football playoff?
Well, just immediate reaction to that last count. What's shocking to me is the Group of 5. For some reason, I think the Group of 5 made it into the top 16, more often than just
because we're counting Cincinnati now as a Big 12 team. That's why.
That's true. Yeah. But still, it's a little bit surprising. As you were going through that, one, absolutely the diversity of teams and matchups that we get really, really intriguing and really cool, because that would break up the monotony. I mean, it's going to be Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, or Ohio State again.
And it still might be one of those teams at the very end.
Correct.
But
At
they're going to
least-
go through a different road to get there
At least we
now.
have a little different, like you
Yeah.
said, a little different road to get there. And for them as well, there's more riding on the regular season too, because Alabama, Florida, Florida State, Miami going to Camp Randall
Yeah.
in December.
Yeah, that's wild.
Don't drop those. You've got to be on every single week. So I think that'll improve the product. Number 2, as you were laying all of these matchups out, each year I was going through and just making a mental note. That's probably a blowout. That's probably a blowout. That's probably a blowout. As you were going through this, with every year except for one, which I mentioned, remember, 2019. And I can go back to that just to you can check me on this if you want. Every year there were at least four blowouts that I counted. As many as 7, that was in 2020. But between 4 and 6 blowouts every single year. The one that I would contend, I'm not sure, I only really saw 1 or 2 for sure, is 2019. LSU, Iowa, that's a blowout. That's an absolute blowout. Wisconsin, Florida, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia, Auburn, I don't know. Oklahoma, Alabama, probably Alabama, but I don't know. Oregon, Utah, I don't know. Clemson, Michigan, I don't. That'd be a good game. Baylor, Penn State, I don't know. Ohio State, Notre Dame, I only see 1 blowout there for sure. So that's the only year where every single game would be competitive. So the question then becomes, is 4 to 6 blowouts a year with an exception every, I don't know, however many years. How many years is this? That's 7 years.
7 years.
7 years of data. Is that an acceptable product to put out there? And then the third thing is as well, I only like this idea, personally as a fan, with the stipulation that all of those first round games, at least, are played in the higher seeds stadium.
I agree
home
with that.
stadium. That's the only way
Yep.
that this is fair, works. Makes it look good on television, and it actually creates an atmosphere of college football playoff environment. Because you go outside of that and you try to get neutral sites, that's another. I mean, how many times can you ask people to fork over money? I mean, most of these teams are going to be, or a lot of these teams are going to be getting off of appearances in their conference championship games as well. So put it in their home stadiums. That's the only stipulation I have. Otherwise, I think it could be an entertaining product as well, because there might be some matchups there where the higher rated team really hasn't been battle tested as much as the lower ranked team, and the lower ranked team goes on the road and beat that. Those could be some really fun games.
So you'd have 8 games on campus sites that first weekend.
Yep.
And then you'd have 4 games. And so this is now where you bring in your traditional bowl matchups. Okay. In the next round, you have 4 of the New Year's 6 bowl games. They rotate on who hosts those games. And then the other 2 host the semifinal games.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then you can have you can do a rotation for who gets the national championship game, although I'd be fine with it just being played in the Rose Bowl every single year. Okay. But I think it's a tremendous field. I do. And here's the thing. Yeah, you're likely looking at 3 or 4 blowouts out of those 8 games every year. But Aaron, we've played 7 years of the college football playoff, and I think we've had, 3 semifinal games that were actually competitive all the way to the end?
Yeah.
So if we've got 3 or 4 guaranteed blowouts every year, that means you've got 3 or 4 guaranteed cliffhangers every year. You don't have those right now, brother.
Nope.
I mean, we've gone through entire playoff seasons where, LSU was just naming the score in that 2019 playoff, for example, right? Alabama just kind of named the score against Notre Dame and then named the score against Ohio State back in 2020. So we're not getting a lot of competitive games now. So if you're telling me we get basically the same amount of blowouts, but we get a bunch more competitive games that we don't get, you have more meaningful postseason games than you do right now with most of these bowl games the kids aren't willing even to play in, okay? And I hear people say that, well, it will dilute the regular season. I think it's the exact opposite. I think more games are meaningful now.
Yeah,
I mean,
you can't go to sleep on Vanderbilt
you
at the end of
cannot.
the season,
More
or Northwestern or Maryland.
Yeah, more games are meaningful now. I don't agree with that at all. I mean, I think that the reality is the amount of games that now have playoff implications grows tremendously from what we currently have.
And for the little teams, the little teams as well, the bottom of the pack teams, how big of a motivation is that? I can go into another opponent's crib. Most years, we're not going to a bowl game. We don't really have anything to play. Now we can go into another team's crib that's kind of on the cusp of the playoff, knock them out of the playoff. That's a major motivation piece. I would assume so.
Yeah.
For
and for those of you that are saying, well, if that's true, then how come college basketball's regular season doesn't rate? They play 31 games.
Yeah.
Not 11 or 12, right? So, I mean, that's the difference. They play 31 games. And the reality is the more games you play in a schedule, the less weight there is on an individual loss. That's never going to be an issue. Think about the NFL. Tell me what weeks in the NFL are not meaningful. They play 17 games. Every game's meaningful. I mean, you lose 2 in a row, that's more than 10% of your schedule, okay? So, absolutely, it is meaningful. And unlike basketball, where everybody's playing 30 games before you even get to March, here you're only going to play 11 or 12. So I don't see any drawback here at all. We'll come back and we'll do our feedback of the week and this week's Twitter poll next. This week's Twitter poll, we asked you, which bet would you rather make for the Big Ten football championship this fall?
No.
Because Ohio State was unanimously picked by the media to win the league. I got to say this as a Michigan fan. I cannot recall, Aaron. I mean, and you know what how prodigious my memory is. I cannot remember a undisputed Big Ten champion that returned its starting quarterback and nobody picked them to repeat. And I started thinking about maybe Northwestern in '95 when they shocked the world. But they weren't undisputed Big Ten champs. They shared it with Ohio State that year. So I don't remember a time that this occurred, but it's going on right now, right? So if you had a choice, which of these bets would you make? Ohio State plus 100 to win it, or the field plus 200 to win it? Aaron, where you at? 54-40 or 53 to 47. Our Twitter following said they put the money on the Buckeyes.
Always go with the field. I mean, you've got multiple chances with the field for 100% better odds.
Correct.
Multiple chances with the field for 100% better odds. Now, you could bet on both to hedge your bets. You bet $10 on Ohio State, $7 or $5 on
20
the
on
field.
one, 10 on the other.
Yeah, something like that. But if you had to pick one, always bet the field, especially at those odds. Now, Ohio State may end up winning it, but the value is in the field here.
Well said. We'll come back. We're here. Let's get to our feedback of the week from Trad Cath Dad. I like that name. This is why Vegas wins.
Yeah.
A majority of people are taking a team with huge questions defensively over multiple good teams, including the defending champ at twice the payout, is what you just said.
Yeah.
Most of us that do this for fun or not professionally, we bet teams. The people that do this professionally, they bet numbers. It doesn't mean that they don't factor in how good the teams are, but you cannot beat Vegas being in the prediction business. When I bet Utah last year, Aaron, 15-1 to win the Pac-10 or Pac-12, I really didn't think they were going to win the Pac-12. Okay, in fact, I didn't pick them to win the Pac-12. I picked Oregon, but they were my third best team in the league, in a league where you might lose 2 or 3 games and could still win it, and you're giving me 15-1 odds.
Yeah, that's
crazy. Why I bet them.
Yeah.
And that bet helped pay for the family to go to Universal Studios back in February. I had one of my best bet win totals last year was Michigan under 8, remember?
Yeah.
And yet when I was offered Michigan 10-1 to win the Big Ten, the other bet that paid for Universal Studios was that bet, betting Michigan 10-1 to win the Big Ten. I didn't think Michigan was going to do better than 7-5. But you're still telling me the team with, at worst, the third best recruiting base in the conference, and you're going to give me 10-1 odds? I'll take it. Not because I'm not predicting Michigan to win. I'm just going to play that value. Play numbers more than teams. You have any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, this is where as well. Now, I think Vegas, in terms of line movements and things like that, if you're betting on a game-by-game basis, Vegas a lot of time will move lines because of of identified sharps and people that they respect. I'm not sure if you've seen this, but I have noticed, I think, over the last couple of years or so, the VIG that you have to pay on favorites has gotten quite a bit larger. I don't know if you've seen this. I don't know what book you bet at. I think that might be because of public money, because they still do have to they have to cover their butts as well. So all that is to say, don't make decisions on bets. This is kind of the value thing as well. Don't make decisions on bets because of how much the VIG is or who the favorite is, because the public is getting more and more involved with this. And so the favorite and the VIG on the favorite may not tell you really that much at all. So you still have to, all that is to say, do your research before you bet.
Well said. That'll do it for this week's episode of Bigger 10. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, 5-star review, share, whichever applies, however you watch, like right here on YouTube, or listen, like on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. Help us to find more Big Ten sports fans just like you. You can also follow us on Twitter in between episodes at Bigger10 as well. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you again right here on Bigger 10.